The weight of sharp words about 6 months of persistent tardiness pressed down, questioning how long they'd act like a child. With a weary gaze fixed forward and a bead of sweat on their cheek, they could only utter a drawn-out, almost resigned apology. Eyes wide with fury, the suit-clad figure aggressively chastised another, declaring they should just stay home if they lacked motivation, pulling them along amidst a pained yelp. A nearby colleague wryly observed the boss had gone mad again as the furious figure then fixed an intense gaze, seemingly on a new target. With a neutral gaze, the section chief tried to de-escalate, suggesting it was time for the board meeting and offering to take responsibility for the newbies' training. But the president reacted with furious disbelief, their eyes wide and hand gesturing emphatically as they declared that excuses for delays were a mortal sin in their business. After a sharp humph, they turned away, leaving the newbie cowering in fear while the section chief watched with a weary, resigned look. Lost in thought after the inauguration, they weighed the new 24-year-old president's strong resolve against the potential for their harsh tone to drive others away. Their neutral gaze turned to quiet frustration as they realized they'd wandered off their usual route, prompting a hurried decision to turn back. With their face streaked with tears and eyes wide with despair, the president slumped on the bench, declaring they couldn't endure the burdens of leadership any longer and wished to be a baby again. The person observing them could only gape in utter astonishment, speechless at such an unexpected outburst. Stumbling upon their boss slumped on a park bench, surrounded by several half-empty drinks, the other person's eyes widened in utter shock, remarking on the unusual sight of them being in such a state. The president, eyes barely open, could only manage a slurred, confused sound in response. Blushing with surprise and concern, one character's downcast gaze fell upon an unfamiliar vulnerability, whispering their shock at having never witnessed such a sight. Meanwhile, their companion, with a slightly furrowed brow, tersely questioned their presence, yet silently realized the immense stress the other had been enduring. Standing over their slumped superior, one character paused, a bead of sweat at their temple reflecting a silent, unspoken question. The seated figure, clutching a can, returned the gaze with wide, vulnerable eyes. A wave of dazed recognition washed over them as their eyes squeezed shut, seeming to recall a familiar face from their middle school days. However, this fleeting familiarity quickly dissolved into utter confusion, their blushing face and instinctively raised hand betraying a bewildered denial of the identity. As one figure slumped on the bench, mistaking their companion for someone named Tsutomu in a drunken stupor, the companion clutched their head in dismay, recognizing the profound level of intoxication. Observing the mortifying scene, another bystander felt a pang of discomfort and resolved to pretend they had witnessed nothing at all. With a nervous flush coloring their cheeks and gaze shyly averted, they gently pulled open their shirt, a soft yet resolute there accompanying the revealing gesture. With eyes stretched wide and mouth agape, utter shock contorted the figure's face. Sweat drops appeared, marking the sudden, panicked realization that washed over them. With wide, shocked eyes, one figure recoiled, loudly questioning what the other was doing in public. Flushed with embarrassment, the other mumbled a highly personal explanation about their chest size, which was promptly met with an overwhelmed, "Too much info," from the first. With heavy-lidded, flushed eyes, the figure slumped on the bench, declaring a growing sleepiness while empty cans sat discarded. Beside them, another figure watched with wide, exasperated eyes, a silent exclamation of disbelief hanging in the air as other tipsy voices echoed in the background. With eyes squeezed shut and tears welling, one figure slurred a surprising invitation to drink together. The figure in the suit, a bead of sweat on their temple, looked on with a strained expression, understanding they couldn't possibly abandon the president in such a vulnerable state, quietly resolving to see them safely home once the current commotion subsided. A deep flush rose to their face, the unexpected invitation sparking a complex, conflicted emotion that hung in the air. Despite it all, they softly murmured, but still. With wide, tear-filled eyes, they flushed deeply and let out a soft, choked sound, wondering if they were truly so annoying. The sudden, intense turn of events felt like a plunge into the deep, leaving them utterly overwhelmed. One blinked in wide-eyed surprise, confessing a self-perception of being high and mighty despite their youth. Beside them, the other was utterly mortified, covering their face as they realized their own subordinates had been gossiping, a truth they hadn't expected. With downcast eyes and fingers pressed close to their deeply flushed face, a delicate side was revealed, quite unlike the strong-willed demeanor usually displayed. A soft, pained sound escaped them, as they seemed to contemplate what punishment this vulnerability might incur. With fierce determination, one figure executed a cobra twist on another, shouting a triumphant, "Take that, you moron," as the victim slumped helplessly. From the side, a third figure watched, eyes wide with shock and concern, whispering that such actions were going too far. Sitting quietly side by side, one figure confessed to always having a short temper, prone to lashing out when they snapped. A deeper reflection followed, acknowledging that the impressive cobra twist performed earlier wasn't a mere reflex, but a deliberate act. Their hands clasped softly, a deep blush painting their cheek as they spoke, gaze downcast. They confessed to doing their utmost to protect their dad's company, admitting it was in their own, particular way. Huddling on the bench, arms wrapped tightly around themselves, they confessed their fear of being underestimated due to their age. This insecurity led them to believe they had to be strict, admitting with a downcast gaze that they felt they could never measure up to their father's capabilities. With a weary gaze fixed downwards, they mused internally that perhaps they weren't cut out for the challenge of running a company. A heavy silence followed, filled with unvoiced doubts and a lingering sense of inadequacy. Responding to the quiet self-doubt, one firmly declared that such thoughts simply weren't true. The other looked up, their eyes wide and cheeks flushing, clearly surprised by the emphatic denial. With a steady gaze, one acknowledged the other's youth, their expression remaining thoughtful. The other, eyes wide and earnest, leaned in slightly to affirm that despite their age, their dedication to the company was profoundly admirable. As they instinctively adjusted their tie, their gaze remained focused, acknowledging the profound weight. It was the burden of being president, a heavy responsibility they seemed to meet with quiet resolve. With a thoughtful gaze, one observed the diligent figure through the office doorway, silently acknowledging their role in leading the company forward. The solitary worker remained focused on their laptop, the screen illuminating their dedicated profile against the late-night window. With a downcast yet encouraging gaze, one spoke to Ishizumi, assuring them their efforts were truly seen and asking them to help out if they had time. They urged Ishizumi to keep moving forward with all their heart, leaving Ishizumi with a look of overwhelmed, grateful acknowledgement. With a gentle, knowing smile, their gaze held a quiet, steadfast resolve. They would always be there, an unwavering presence promising endless support. Beneath the star-flecked sky, their head remained bowed, a silent moment given to absorbing the steadfast resolve from earlier. A quiet commitment seemed to settle deep within them in the stillness. Suddenly flustered, their eyes widened in surprise, a deep blush rising to their cheeks as they clutched nervously at their clothing. They hesitated, processing the moment, then stammered a question, wondering if they were actually being flirted with. With a deep blush and eyes squeezed shut in mortification, they buried their face in their hands, protesting that they didn't even know each other's names yet. Beside them, the other quickly raised their hands, eyes wide in a panic as they tried to explain their words hadn't been meant that way, surprised by the sudden, deep understanding despite having just met. As the other figure buried their face in mortification, the first could only offer a bewildered, well, their eyes wide with uncertainty. With hands open in a gesture of helpless confusion, a nervous sweat drop appeared as they struggled for a response. Looking up with a faint blush still on their cheeks, they hesitated, their fingers twisting a lock of hair. With a shy yet determined glint in their eyes, they then tentatively offered a compromise, suggesting they wouldn't mind starting as friends. With a sudden, explosive realization, their gaze went blank and mouth fell open. Both hands instinctively shot up, as if trying to block out the overwhelming shock that enveloped them. A soft, sleep-mumbled confession of "I might even like you" floated through the air, causing the character who had just experienced a sudden realization to completely lose their composure. Their face flushed crimson as they squeezed their eyes shut in frantic panic, desperately urging themselves and their boss to calm down and get a grip. One of them suddenly erupted in a desperate, urgent cry to halt the moment, their wide eyes filled with panic and sweat beading on their brow. Across from them, the other met their flustered gaze with a subtle, knowing smirk, a soft blush dusting their cheek. As the moment intensified, one figure desperately reached out, their hands splayed against the other's chest, beads of sweat forming on their skin. A choked sound, bibo, was all they could manage, their mind reeling from the abrupt confession. With a soft pwa and a sleepy ogu, one figure slumped heavily against the other, clearly overcome by drink. The other, eyes narrowed in weary exasperation, remained stiff, silently processing the sudden weight as their hands hovered, unsure whether to support or gently push away. Watching the sleeping figure, their eyes squinted shut in profound relief, a faint blush and a small sweat drop appearing on their cheeks. A wave of gratitude washed over them, recognizing that the other was finally at peace. A gentle, knowing smile touched their lips as their gaze, soft and half-lidded, observed the peaceful sight before them. It was a moment of quiet, tender satisfaction. With eyes gently closed and a faint blush, their features softened into a tender smile, reflecting on the other's relentless hard work. Resting close, a quiet "boss" was murmured, brimming with soft appreciation for their dedication. Under the starry city sky, one figure gently supported their companion, their gaze thoughtfully sweeping the buildings as they pondered where their house might be. Leaning close, the other softly offered to hail a taxi, their intertwined figures moving slowly through the illuminated night. As a new day broke with birds taking flight under a wide sky, the lingering peace was abruptly broken. A piercing, urgent cry of "Ishizumi" cut through the air, signaling an immediate shift in focus. The standing figure, clipboard in hand, carefully asked about the situation, a flicker of relief crossing their expression internally that last night seemed forgotten. However, their eyes widened as the seated figure, with an intense, unwavering gaze and a visibly furrowed brow, abruptly suggested harsh action against a tardy newcomer, determined to put an end to any workplace harassment. Wearily resting their head in their hand, they murmured a wish to simply drink and unwind. A frustrated sigh escaped them, their half-lidded eyes expressing the exasperating thought that they're all the same. The tapping of their finger on the surface echoed their internal confusion. They wondered how they had managed to get home the previous night, finding the memory stubbornly elusive. Against a shimmering backdrop, a comforting presence felt near, a silent vow emerging from the depths of weary confusion. This was the unwavering reassurance that, no matter what, they would always be the one to provide steadfast support. With a soft blush dusting their cheeks, they gazed forward, a tablet held gently in their hands. They wondered if another visit to the park today would bring a familiar presence into view, a subtle longing shimmering in their eyes.